Scott, it's excellent to welcome you back to the show. How are you doing tonight?
I'm great. I'm great. How are you, Jason? Happy to
I'm
be
really
here.
well, and thanks for your flexibility. We're doing your show here at 6, and normally we're going to try to do it at 3 p.m., but I had another show that was happening there earlier today. Interesting show about the war in Ukraine. I want to get back to some of what we were discussing. You've been doing some outstanding work. You've got the Bigger Truth show, and people can go to biggertruthmedia.com, follow you on Substack. They can watch our live streams together here on X, follow you there at Bigger Truth. And also at 6:30, we are going to have a sponsor exclusive segment that people who support you on Substack at biggertruthmedia.com will be able to join us for. People will also be able to get a simulcast of that on all the crowdsourced, the truth channels. What would you like to discuss today, Scott?
I actually just got off the phone with one of my sources that gave me a little bit of a, you know, not necessarily new details, but an interesting perspective, kind of an inside perspective on what's happening with Boris Epshteyn. And so I think that, that might be an interesting place to start because, Boris is very close with Steve Bannon. He's been on Bannon's War Room, since the beginning. He's been a frequent guest of Bannon's War Room. And he's an attorney, and he's Russian. He's I don't think he was born in Russia, but his parents were. And he's a pretty smart guy. He's very kind of America first, that's his brand. And he's been with Trump for a long time. And I think that Trump really trusts him. And so there was John Solomon put out a really major hit piece on him. I think it was this morning or last night. And what it alleges is that he was doing essentially a quid pro quo kind of consulting practice where he was uh, saying, telling politicians if you want, and people that and business people and stuff, if you want an inside track to get a job in Trump's administration, you got to hire me as a consultant. And so yeah, that's the story, and it has a lot of details. It's pretty lengthy. I read it this morning, and my first impression of the story is that somebody really doesn't like Boris, because the reality is that this is the way politics works. Everybody does this, from what I understand, and it's not unique to Trump's administration. This is just the way it's always been. If you have access to an incoming president and you have inside access, you
Right.
sell that access. That's just the way it works.
Well, but
And
does he have evidence of that? Because it's also there always seems to be somebody who's there to make an allegation that seems credible. In other words, we've seen these kind of allegations against Matt Gaetz, and I think it's one of those things. People look at him and decide: do they like this guy? Do they dislike this guy? And whether it's true or false. Do they have evidence about this stuff? I don't know anything about it.
yeah. So there were multiple sources cited. John Solomon himself wrote it, and it's a pretty compelling piece of journalism. I mean, he it's well supported. So he has multiple sources. He's personally reviewed text messages and emails that support it. He doesn't publish those, but that he doesn't need to. As a journalist, he says that he reviewed them. There's named sources throughout. The primary name source appears to be Besant, who was he's the Treasury Department um, appointee. So Trump just appointed him to be the head of the Treasury, and there's a lot of division about him. Some people think he's good, some people think he's bad. I don't really have much of an opinion personally. I haven't looked too much into him, but John Solomon treats him glowingly in this article. And the impression that I have is that that's his primary source, and that he had other sources as well. And so I think that it's Besant that is unhappy with them. He tried to actually, so what Besant says is that Boris approached him back early this year and said, if you want to have a the possibility of getting into and getting a job, a high level position in the Trump administration. If he wins, you got to hire me as a consultant now. And he was, and it was multiple tens of thousands to even hundred thousand or more per month is what he was charging, which is kind of crazy. That's
Wow.
yeah. And what he was saying in there is that, that this is, I'm providing communications consulting. That's what he's saying. But the the thing is that all of them do this. Everybody does this. From what I understand, Corey Lewandowski is famous for it in
Hmm.
selling access to, especially to candidates that want a Trump endorsement.
Wow.
But I think I talked to somebody today that thinks that even Don Jr. and Eric Trump probably do it. So,
Wow.
I
Well,
think everybody,
but do
whether
they
they
know
money,
or they just say that?
well, so here's what one person said is that even if they don't actually charge money for it, they still have Trump's ear. And so they, they
Anybody
have,
gives them anything, there's potentially a presumption that you're gaining some level of access to the president. Well, I mean, so, okay, you're talking about sort of a spectrum. I mean, obviously, if you met Donald Trump Jr. and even had him on your podcast and he liked you, it would increase your likelihood of gaining access to the president. So there's some spectrum of what you can do that is okay that does that and what you can do that, I mean, straight out telling somebody you got to give me 50 grand if you want to even entertain the possibility of talking to the guy. That's crooked as hell. And obviously, I mean, does Trump know becomes the question, or is this just somebody who's near him who's taking advantage of that? But there's, I mean, the thing that's most interesting to me about the whole thing is that, we sometimes hear about stories like you and I were talking about, like, what the hell is this Michael Flynn running for vice president thing doing on the Federal Election Committee? Nobody said a peep about that. And here's something maybe sort of on equal scale, but yet New York Times, everybody's all over this. So what is, one of these things doesn't look like the others. What is it about this that they're all over Epstein?
exactly.
Why?
And Patrick Byrne has been running victory lap after victory lap
Oh,
today. If you look at his ex, he's
well,
got three or four posts about it celebrating. He really does not like Boris. In one of them, he actually says that Boris hates Flynn and he's a Flynn hater. And he's very happy.
but is that
Patrick,
true? Because sometimes what these lawfare lunatics do is they'll stage a public fight to make you think they're enemies. Now, one thing that's pretty nice here, Scott, I think maybe just last week or something, they changed it so that even if you're blocked, you can still read people's stuff.
Mhm.
See that?
Right.
So he's inventing a napkin or something. What's wrong with our election system?
Hmm.
Oh yeah, look at that. Who was asked to give Boris payments under the table? If I were in Trump world, I would suggest. So see, this is interesting. So it I'm not defending anyone, but when I see these guys hanging around promoting a particular angle on the story, it's very interesting, isn't it?
Well, and that one too, that one especially in South Carolina, because I've looked into South Carolina quite a bit. And Drew McKissick, he's the state party, the state Republican Party chair there. And he has done an excellent job of holding back the so Jeff Davis and Keith Blanford are the two insurgents. They're the leaders of the insurgents in South Carolina, and they're close to very close, very close to Flynn and Byrne. And so, of course, he's attacking Drew McKissick because he's done an outstanding job of holding, standing in the gap and preventing them from really rising into power beyond their counties. And so yeah, they use that to attack somebody else. Here he's even saying hallelujah as
Hmm.
and um yeah, it's interesting. Um so that's an element of it. And I think
But wow,
Boris,
this is saying that Trump's own team found that Epstein did
that's right.
this. So
It's an
that
internal
seems. So is he
um
fired or what happened?
um no, I don't think he was formally employed. He was just somebody that Trump, and I think that this is probably extremely disappointing to President Trump. He is, he, I think he genuinely likes Boris, and I think that he speaks, from what I understand, he speaks to Boris very frequently and like multiple times a day, possibly. And so I think that Trump's probably not too happy about this. He made a statement that's in that John Solomon piece saying nobody should be making money off of this. They should just be doing this to make America great again, which obviously is the right thing to say. But I think that he knows that, you know, this is part of what's going on. If he didn't know that this was going on, then I think that that would be even more problematic because from what I understand, it's pretty widespread.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, see, that's the whole thing, like what people know and what they don't know, and what malicious actors get planted in the sphere around Trump to do crazy stuff and then blame it on him. Like this whole Michael Flynn thing, excuse me, Michael Cohen thing. And by the way, that's another topic for us to discuss. The fact that they just like took like, oh, drop all that. It's like, wait a minute, how the hell can you do that? Just suddenly drop. You were ready to go. And somebody raised a very good point. If Trump hadn't won, do we really think that Jack Smith would have dropped this case? They would have proceeded with it. There's something very, really unprecedented, I would say, happening now. The deep state is convulsing. Don't you agree, Scott?
Yeah, well, I think that Mike Davis, I don't tend to agree with him on a lot of things, but he was on Steve Bannon today. I saw you share that. And I actually really I agree with him there. I think that there are judges right now who are very nervous because they have taken great liberties with the law to in order to really persecute Trump.
Yeah. Or not just Trump. But see, that's the thing. Trump has exposed it. I mean, I've experienced it firsthand, not criminal, thank goodness. They don't have the power to put me in jail. I mean, that is, I haven't given them the opportunity, I should say, and I'm careful to try not to. But just even from a civil standpoint, dismantling my business, my ability to, access audience and to grow the show, which, by the way, I want to thank you again for starting this new sponsor exclusive show with me. People can be able to join us in about 15 minutes on biggertruthmedia.com. And also on odyssey.com/@crowdsourcethetruth, crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com, and subscribestar.com, and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Not to digress, Scott, but just for a minute, this whole direct to viewer sponsorship program, this is the only reason I'm still around with Crowdsource the Truth. I started this 8 years ago. Everybody was like, oh my God, I'm getting demonetized on YouTube. Whoever imagined such a circumstance could occur? And I was brand new then, and I was thinking, well, gee, why do I want to get involved in trying to be monetized on YouTube if everybody is complaining about getting demonetized on there? And at the time, things like Patreon and whatever, I think we're pretty new, and not a lot of people were really using them. Obviously, Odyssey and Substack and those other things weren't even around yet, but I just started promoting this idea of direct to viewer sponsorship because it seemed like the only way to do it to me. And what I've realized over the course of several years is it absolutely is the smartest way to do it, because rather than having one big, gigantic corporate sponsor, even if it's some really patriotic water filter company or some gold exchange company, if they decide they don't like what you're talking about and stop advertising on your show, that's it. They have too much leverage. Here, everybody becomes a micro sponsor, and individuals are free to sponsor or not sponsor, agree or disagree. We're not trying to convince anybody of anything, just share our views and like that.
Yeah, I think you know the the reason why so many of these things have happened to us is because our media is completely captured. And we really have a captured media, and on the right and on the left. We do not have investigative journalism in this country. And when you don't have journalists going out there and trying to find out what's going on and exposing the people who are in power, then the people who are in power just run with it. And and that's a big part of what we've experienced. And I think that it's no accident that the whole media landscape and the business model for journalism has really imploded. I mean, you've got that what YouTube did there was terrible. And Facebook, they've done the same kind of stuff, and that's one of the big things that really needs to be exposed, and what Twitter 1.0 was doing under Jack Dorsey. And so you've got big tech really conspiring, but then the media companies too. I mean, news consumers expect to get free journalism. They just expect that journalism is going to be free. But if I could go work for a newsroom and report on the things that I'm told to report on, but I wouldn't have the freedom to figure out what I think is important and what I think people need to know that isn't being investigated, and what isn't being told. And so you'd miss out on that. And so I think that what you're doing here is really important, and what I'm doing is important, and we need more of us. And I think news consumers really need to step up and to help these little guys that are really boots on the ground trying to
Yeah.
for the stories that won't be covered otherwise.
Yeah, and also I encourage people to think of it not as, helping. And sometimes people send me messages like, "Oh, can I donate?" It's not a matter of donating. This is a new business model for how this is the way news should work, frankly. And you've said it. This old model is going away. A lot of people have been talking about Doge and this Department of Government Efficiency that they're working on. It's good to see certain, Congress members and people in the Senate and everything coming forward with plans that they've had for a while to gain some efficiency in the government. I saw Amuse on X had a Substack about how the public broadcasting system and NPR, when they came about in 1967 and you only had 3 channels, there was an argument to be made that like, hey, these things cater to New York, Los Angeles, these mass markets or whatever, and people need access to educational information on television or whatever. They established these things. But, that was 60 years ago. It's a relic, and they no longer can make a valid argument that people don't have a choice in media. I think what we're doing, and with the help of our sponsors, because we couldn't do this without them, we're eliminating this sort of legacy idea that news and information and entertainment are free, air quotes, free. We're just going to cut to a break from our sponsor here at Pfizer or Exxon or Lockheed Martin or whatever it is. So, people want to not be captured by these corporate interests, and this is the way to do it. But just to focus back on the message for a second, you had raised an interesting point when we were speaking earlier today in terms of who will Trump investigate first. And it does seem like, hopefully, if we can avoid any extremely stupid, well, I should say fatally stupid decisions by Joe Biden, if we don't get nuked before January 20th, hopefully Donald Trump will be able to be inaugurated and begin some investigations. Who do you think? Who's the first?
Well, I think it's got to be the investigators. You got to first investigate the investigators, and and that's where there's just a huge question: how does the FBI investigate itself? And it has to. And I think that there are people within the FBI, honest investigators within the FBI, who are absolutely disgusted with what's gone on there. And there is nobody better to investigate them than those people. So those people need to be identified and put into a position
But what,
of
now, wait a minute, because I'm getting confused. When you say those people and the FBI and blah, 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 isn't it true that the investigators, I mean, they're no longer in the FBI. We're talking about Robert Mueller, Andrew Weissman, their whole team. This was, we're going back 8 years now. And, when you say they, who is they? Who will investigate whom, if that's grammatically correct? Let's start really drilling in. Like, who do you think the very first? I mean, shouldn't Norm Eisen, Andrew Weissman, Benjamin Witties, who put this thing together? Who's the cherry on the top of this? That's, Flynn's not the mastermind. No 1.2 GPA put all this together. He's just pulling triggers. Somebody
Sure.
else is the shot caller.
Well, I mean, didn't Strzok and Page admit that they were reporting directly to Obama too? You know, so I think that it does need to. We have Trump when he was former president being investigated by the FBI, and if there are legitimate ties to him as he was sitting president, ordering the investigation of a candidate for president, and illegal wiretapping, and abuse of FISA courts and all that kind of stuff. I think that really does need to be exposed, and people need to pay. And
Well, I
Hillary
agree,
needs.
but the question, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the question is, do you think they have the capability to it, the FBI? Do we have confidence in them? And, it seems like the momentum is going towards Kash Patel everywhere. That's the only name I hear people recommending as who should be the FBI director.
Well, I would be shocked if there aren't other people under consideration also. Dan Scavino said a couple days ago that Mike Rogers has never been in consideration. And, that really just shows how much speculation, how much of a divide there is between reality and speculation. So I don't think that that Cash is the only name being circulated. I think that all of this that's happening, it's, this is primarily the Flynn network, and they're really,
Social engineering,
yeah,
just
it
putting
is.
that out.
Yep. I think that that's
I
what's going.
agree. That could be right. So
Um,
why would you object to who first of all, why would you object to Kash Patel for FBI? Maybe, you know what, we're almost out of time, Scott. So what we'll do is during the sponsor exclusive segment, we'll get into some details on this. Who you think should be leading the FBI, why you object to Kash Patel as the FBI director, and let's get into some sort of like wargaming of what's this going to look like, investigating exactly who for what, and who will do that. We've got about 2 minutes before we head over to our sponsor exclusive segment that people can watch by becoming sponsors on biggertruthmedia.com or on odyssey.com/@crowdsourcethetruth, crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com, or any of these channels. Scott, take us out.
yeah, well, I think, because we've been talking about Boris Epshteyn, I think that the bottom line is there's a lot more to this story than we're being told. There's a lot of people who are opposed to Flynn who are jumping on, Boris Epshteyn because, of his ties with Steve Bannon, and Steve Bannon has ties with Flynn. And, so, we want to put everybody in this neat camp, but sometimes they work together, they work against each other, seemingly, and that's kind of by design. So, uh, there's just a lot more to this story. I have a feeling that Basant is kind of behind this, that he approached John Solomon and kind of put this whole story together. I think that
Who did
there's
that? DeSantis?
no Basant,
Oh, Basant.
the new Treasury director.
Huh.
Um,
Wow.
I just,
Whoa.
based on the story, just the way that John Solomon treats him in that story, and this is just speculation on my part. It is very clear. I mean, what's not speculation is that he was, as a source for John Solomon, he was 100% against Boris. So, I mean, that's very clear when you read the story, that he had nothing nice to say at all about Boris. And John Solomon really took his side. So, throughout, and that he was 100% on his side. So, um, if there's anybody that was treated glowingly in that report, it was him. So, that's my gut feeling, is that he has at least something to do with this. And just knowing what it is to be a reporter, people come to you with story ideas all the time. And if they can pitch it to you and they can package it with some other, two or three other sources and some documents, and they put the whole thing together for you, it makes it easy. And I just have a feeling that that's kind of what happened here. I don't know why, and maybe it was somebody else. Maybe it came from someone else. I think
So
that in a way this is also against Trump, this because I do think that Boris has been very close with Trump. Trump has really valued and appreciated Boris. And I think that my guess is that after this story that Trump has his antenna up, because, he's obviously very sensitive about leaks and attacks of his own team.
wow. So we've got a lot to get into here. People aren't going to want to miss this. I have a million questions. Don't miss the sponsor exclusive follow-up. It's happening right now. Stay with us. Become a sponsor on either biggertruthmedia.com. You can sponsor Scott there. Follow all of his work on Substack, or join us on odyssey.com/@crowdsourcethetruth, crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com, or subscribestar.com, or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. We'll be right back.